The first plague pandemic is known as the Plague of Justinian. It starts in 541 AD and goes on for about 200 years. There are a few first-hand accounts of it, but we do know that it killed around 100 million people, and it hit Africa, Asia, and Europe, devastating the population that wasn't nearly as big as it is today. The name of the pandemic itself carries the name of the Emperor Justinian. He was the Byzantine emperor at the time, and it was a really fucked up time for him. You see, he had this big dream. He had this big, grandiose dream of a rebuilt Rome. The people living in the Byzantine Empire at the time didn't call themselves Byzantines. They didn't think of themselves as Byzantines. They thought of themselves as Romans. They called themselves Romans. Justinian called himself a Roman emperor, and he looked to the west and saw the ruins of a once great empire and thought, hey, no way guys, we're gonna get that part back. Justinian sets about on these wars of reconquest to regain the Roman land, to regain Rome. And things are going okay with this. But in 541 AD, a ship comes in from Alexandria, Egypt, which is Constantinople's breadbasket at the time. It's a grain ship, and on these grain ships are rats. And the rats, of course, are carrying Yersinia pestis, the plague. This couldn't have come at a worse time. Justinian's generals are all around, they're kicking a lot of ass, and all of a sudden the plague comes and just throws a gigantic wrench into the plans. That first initial hit of plague goes on for about 4 months. Nobody goes outside. The only time they go outside is to bury the dead. Whole towns are depopulated. Half the population of Constantinople died. Justinian himself survives the plague, but you're never quite the same after you survive the plague. They said that he was kind of zombie-like, wandering around the palace at night. There are also reports of his disembodied head floating around the palace at night though too, so you kind of have to take these things with a grain of salt. Plague took a lot of people. It took farmers who can't grow food anymore because they're dead, and citizens who can't pay tax anymore because they're dead, and soldiers who can't fight anymore because they're dead. Well, you know where that gets you? It gets you a little bit of not where you want to be if you're Justinian, because what happens is he kind of holds on to some of the gains that he makes, but they gradually slip out of the empire's hands shortly after his death. The plague would come back every generation for the next 200 years. And can you imagine what that did to people? Can you imagine being like, oh, I wonder when my generation's plague is gonna happen? Or the elders who would be like, you guys' generation's plague sucks, you bunch of pansies. Back when I was a kid, we took our plague like men. These kids these days, they don't know how to handle an awful death plague. I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine what that did to people? Can you imagine what that did to the culture? Because of the lack of first-hand accounts, we really don't know what the Plague of Justinian did to the people or what it did to the culture. We can't really know for real because there weren't many records kept that survived. But when the plague did strike again, many records were kept. Many records survived, and we do know what it did to the people, and we do know what such a terrifying event did to the culture, and I'll be telling you a little bit about it next time on Terrifying World.